All right, hi everyone, welcome. We've got a lot of project stuff to talk about today, but before that, I actually want to just take a few minutes to follow up on something that I talked to you about on Tuesday. Just kind of go through that. We talked about code quality on Tuesday, and I asked you to take a look at another old 131 assignment called Gambler's Ruin and see how much you could fix it up. And I just wanted to show you my revision on this and talk about it just for a couple minutes before we hop into the project. So you can see my main method is nice and short, just how I like it. Should only be a couple lines at the top. And then in terms of the methods that I was able to extract out, they fall into a few major categories. So you can see these two are built around getting user inputs, either an integer or a double, depending on what we need. Then I've got a couple based on performing the actual simulation. So one of them that simulates many days, and then another one that simulates a single day, which is called by the other method, as you can probably imagine. A method to compute the expected ruin rate, and then one more method to just kind of oversee and run the entire simulation. So I think this is actually much improved over the way this code was given to you, but certainly not perfect. In fact, if you come down and look at some of these methods, you'll notice that some of them even still have more than three parameters. A lot of them have three parameters, so still kind of pushing the limit in terms of what I would like to see amongst these methods. Well, doing a whole lot of objects. We're not doing a whole lot of object-oriented programming. That is something that I want to talk to you about, but we'll get started on that after. Because today we need to discuss the project. But hopefully you had a chance to take a peek and work on this a bit between Tuesday and today. Just like I said, wanted to show you my version so you could kind of compare and see where you're at versus, again, this isn't a perfect solution, but it's definitely moving in the right direction. With that out of the way, though, let's go ahead and shift gears and talk about the project. So here's how this project's going to work. With the group, I think you're aware of that by now. So if you've already formed groups, if you haven't formed groups, there'll be time for that. So the way to come, maybe the first half of class or so, going over the project, so we will maybe get there everybody kind of knows what the expectations are. I'm actually going to give you a to-do list so that everybody gets off to a good start. And there aren't hopefully isn't any ambiguity about what I'm asking you to do. And then the second half of class is going to be time to either find a group if you haven't found a group already, or meet with your groups and just do some basic organizational, a little bit of life planning stuff before you leave here today, so that everybody's knows what's going on, knows what their responsibilities are, and there hopefully won't be any questions or ambiguity by the time we're done with class today. So let me start by introducing the way that this project works. I think it's a little bit different than the projects that you're used to. I actually want to start by talking to you about the project criteria, which you can find down here when the first iteration is due. There's a list of criteria that is going to be used to grade this project right here. And I think it's important for you to understand what these criteria are because a big old pile of code at the end of it. This is much more about the process. This is much more about how you contribute to this project versus what you contribute. So you can see that the criteria map pretty well the kinds of things we've been learning about in this class. So the first one is testing. Are there enough unit tests? Is the code being tested properly? That's something that we've been chatting about in recent weeks. Repository management has to do with your GitHub repository. So that's another main focus of the class, right? Is using Git effectively. So I'm going to talk to you today about a branching strategy that I want you all to use. Typically, we don't just put all of our commits directly into main. You're going to be expected to use branch, use them in a particular way. This also deals with stuff like what's in the repository. Is there any extra junk in that repository that shouldn't be? Are you using pull requests? Merge branches properly once you're done with everything. That's kind of what falls in that category. Project management has to just do with the idea that we've got multiple people working on this, so we want to make sure that everyone is working on their own separate piece of the project. we're going to set up a Kanban board today to help us track the various tasks. And actually, I've already laid out the tasks for you for this first iteration. So I'm going to tell you what to do for this first one. Just kind of keep it simple, straightforward for you. But in the future, you'll have some flexibility. You'll be able to come up with your own ideas how you want to extend the project to it. So we'll talk about that a little bit more today. Code cleanliness, code quality. That's what we've been talking about most recently, right? So you're going to be graded on not just whether the code works, but also is it crafted well? Does it follow those guidelines, right? Are the methods short? Variables named well? Are we using good object-oriented programming? And then finally, the last thing down here at the bottom has to do with functionality. So does it work? Does it actually do what it's supposed to do? Which for most of the projects, right? This is the one and only criteria. Does it actually work? Or maybe the biggest one, perhaps. But for us, it is just one of 5. So I want you to keep that in mind every semester, especially on the first iteration, the first 2-week chunk. I get students who are used to just cranking out big old piles of code, and they want to crank out a big old pile of code and ship it to me. That is not going to sleep well, right? The way that I want you to approach this project is lots of incremental changes in a very controlled, right, process, very, standardized kind of way. That's what I'm looking for on this project. You're not going to impress me by submitting thousands of lines of code. Quite the opposite. Most of the tasks that I'm asking you to do aren't going to require that much code. And I would much rather see little small chunks incrementally added on. That's how real projects work. That's how real projects grow. So in 3 weeks from today, we have spring break, and then 2 weeks after that, for all the work on this. We're going to have our first period. So that means that when you come in after the first iteration is done, after you get your first set of tasks all done, you're going to come in class, and you're going to be assigned to look at someone else's project, not your project, but someone else's project, and grade it based on these 5 criteria. I'll walk you through that process first time, because I'm sure most of you have probably not done a whole lot of peer review, but it's a good skill to know. And then I'm also going to grade every project on these 5 criteria. We're going to add that to your peer reviews to get back from the other students in the class, and that's how this is going to be graded overall, with the peer review feedback combined with my own feedback on these 5 criteria. I also want to make it this is a long-term project. So the first deadline is in 2 weeks, but we have 3 deadlines. So there's 2 more 2-week-long iterations after the first one. So it's very common, and I'm already kind of expecting the first couple of weeks, the first crack at this can be kind of chaotic for people. Kind of throwing a lot at you today. It's new for a lot of us. Not really worked on projects in this way in the past. So, it's very likely that things will be missed. Certain steps may not be completed exactly right. That's okay. That's part of the process. I want to make it clear that the way this project works, let's say you do miss a few things in the first iteration. I'll certainly mark that off. But then on the second iteration, you'll be expected to go back and fix those things up. And if you do, I will give you the points back. So points that are taken away from you are able to be earned back. I also think that's a much more accurate reflection of real life, right? Like if I have screwed up a project that I'm working on, I just say, oh, I guess it's broken, -3 points for me. I fixed it. I go back and I take the time to figure it out and fix it. And then I move on. So I'm going to expect you all to do that as well. You'll have the opportunity to fix mistakes, correct mistakes, and get those points back on later iterations. That's a big part of this project as well. So I just kind of want to make sure that that's all clear to us. Again, it's a bit different than your traditional CS end of semester project. So I'm trying to make that clear, trying to illustrate what the differences are. But with that all out of the way, what I'd like to do next is just kind of go through how to get everything set up. So I've actually created a project for you that contains some code. So I'm going to walk you through that in a little bit, but I also want to walk you through the steps to get everything set up with your team, the steps that I'm going to ask you to do at the end of class today, basically. So the first thing that you'll need to do when you're getting ready to set up the project is to form a group. I know some of you already have a group, as I mentioned. If you don't have a group, that's I'm going to stop talking in the next 20 minutes or so. Once I get done saying what I need to say. After your group is formed, actually, before you do anything else, I think you should have a little bit of a conversation with everybody and talk about what tools, or more specifically, what tools. I have set this up to work with VS Code, which I think will probably be fine for a lot of you. Some of you I know would rather use Flips. I don't have a problem. The issue is that if you're working on a team of 4 people, half of them are using VS Code and half of them are using Eclipse, that can be a problem, right? That can be an issue. So, can you figure out how to make that work? Yes. Is it more complicated? Is it going to make the project more complicated than it needs to be? So, yes. So, my advice really is to not try to have 2 different things happen at the same time and agree up front. We're all going to use VS Code, right? We're all going to use Eclipse. Whatever the case may be, you can use IntelliJ if you want to, although I'll warn you all that I'm pretty good with VS Code and Eclipse. Don't have a ton of IntelliJ experience. So if that's the one you ultimately end up choosing, I don't know how much help I'm going to be, but I'm not going to stop you from choosing that if that's what you and your group decide is the best path forward. So, okay, once you've got that taken care of, you formed a group, you've decided we're all going to use VS Code or whatever, then you can go ahead and create your repo. And the way to do that is by going over to today's date on Canvas and clicking on the project kickoff. There's a link right here. It says click here to create the team and the repository for your project. So you, of course, only need one repository for your team. I created a little demo one for me to walk through and show you all this stuff. So here's what it looks like. When you first create your repository, you'll notice that it doesn't look like there's any actual code in it. But if we scroll down here, you'll see that, we do have some information. So this is a list of user stories. These user stories are going to be the individual tasks that you are completing to add new functionality to this project. And you can tell by these user stories the project that I'm going to work on. So it's not exciting, it's not the most fun thing in the world, but it is practical. And that's kind of what I was going for, something that is at least somewhat useful and also pretty familiar to most of us, right? Use ATM, something like that. So stories. I actually did the first one. That's why I said I put my name by it, right? So I did the first one. I'm going to show you my code for that, how I did all that in just a moment. But for the rest of them, there are 8. There are 8 more. So everybody in your group is responsible to do 2 of them. So if there's 4 people in your group, you're going to have to figure out which 2 of these 8 you're going to do. If there's only 3 people in your group, you don't have to do all 8 of these. You just have to do. Everybody has to do 2, right? So there's only 3 people in your group. Then you pick which of these 2 you can do. You can do the leftover ones next time, maybe, right? There'll be more time for us to come back and pick those up. But what we need to do is decide who's going to do what. I think that's one of the most important things that I want everybody to have when they leave here today is which of these 8 tasks am I responsible? Which 2 of these tasks am I responsible for? Just to make sure that everybody knows what they're working on and there's no conflicts, there's no overlaps. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do when you set up your repository is to create a Kanban board, which is just a simple way of tracking the different tasks and who's working on what. So in order to do that, you're going to click on the Projects tab up here on the repository, and then click New Project. There's a bunch of different boards available, and if we had more time, I would love to talk to you about some of these different options and what they're used for. But the one that we're going to be using is just a simple, very simple Kanban board. Give it a name up here, Demo 2. Since the one from this morning was Demo 1, I'll call this one Demo 2. And then create this project. And then here's what it looks like. Here's our brand new empty Kanban board. These columns are called lanes. And each of these lanes will have a certain amount of tasks in it that specifies, what phase that task is in. So if it hasn't been started yet, it'll be over here in the backlog. If somebody's currently working on it, it'll be in progress. There'll be a review phase after the pull request is made, and then finally it'll be done. I typically don't use this ready lane and just delete it. But you can use it if you want to. Again, there's definitely flexibility, room for you to have your own opinions and goals. But once you create your Kanban board, you need to actually get these user stories on here. You need to create these tasks. So the way to make that happen is to click down here on the backlog. I'm going to click Add Item, and I'll just copy. Oh, I wish I hadn't closed that tab. Let me get my tab back up with everything. I'm just going to copy. So I already did this one. So none of you need to do this. I'm going to show you the code for that in just a little bit. But I'm going to copy the second one onto my Kanban board and select Create a New Issue. This is the repository that we want. So I'll select Blank Issue. This is the text that I copied that defines the task, right? I'll go ahead and click Create. And once that happens, you'll see the little card gets added. But the nice thing, and the reason why I'm having you do this, is because after I create this, I can click on it, and then over here on the right-hand side, I can assign it to someone. So I'm the only person in my group. That's why my name is the only one that should. Once you form your groups, you can go to the assignments. The particular member on your team who's going to be responsible for doing that particular task. So I'll just go ahead and assign that one to myself for now. Another nice, excuse me, another nice thing about creating tasks in this way, when you eventually get there, you can also link a pull request. So you can see there's an option to link a pull request for this task, which is a nice thing to be able to do once you eventually get to that point. But you'll need to add all of the tasks on here, either 6 tasks or 8 tasks, depending on how many people are in your group, and then decide who's going to do what and assign those tasks. So that really, I think, is in terms of what I'm hoping you get done today, right? That is it. That is what I'm hoping to get done before I'm honestly not expecting anybody to write any code or put any serious effort into this project until after spring break. Just trying to get everybody all situated so that when you're ready to work, you don't need to do anything extra. That's the goal for today. But how do we do that? So that's just all set up. It's just a little stuff that needs to be done the one time. The tasks to be done. How do I actually perform my task and add it? So this down here is sort of your to-do list, right? For this iteration, I would expect you to go through this process once for each of the 2 tasks. Right? So every task is going to follow the same general setup, where our first step is to create a branch for the task. So every task is going to have its own branch associated with it. And the name of the branch should be based on the name of the task, not the name of the person. I'm saying this because I see it all the time. It's very implementation and name the branch after yourself. It's my branch. It's where my work goes. But that is not the proper way to name branches. The branch should be named on the particular task that you are implementing. So that means that if you're in a 4-person group, you're each doing 2 tasks, you're going to be creating 8 branches, right? 1 for each of those tasks. After you create the branch, I'm really, 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 really trying to encourage you to use test-driven development. So I would want you to write the unit tests first, and ideally more than one. One of the more common comments I give on the project is not enough unit tests. It's very difficult to write unit tests. I think that's one of the trickiest parts of the project, actually. So, that'll be a struggle for a lot of people. It's part of the reason why we're doing it. So you get more practice, so you understand how to actually start writing unit tests, but write as many tests as you can up front. Then test-driven development says, write the code to pass those tests. Now, I want to make it absolutely clear that there is some stuff that's not testable I mentioned this when we were talking about test-driven development a couple weeks ago. Doing UI testing, it can be done, but it is outside the scope of this class. So I'm not asking you to test UI elements, which is a non-trivial amount of code that you're actually going to be writing. But one thing that I do think I do want to make it clear, right? Every single thing that I had, every single task needs to update the UI. In other words, there's going to be a menu options, pick from, right? And if I write code to make withdrawals from bank accounts, but there's no way for me to actually access that functionality from the user interface, from the menu, it's worthless, right? So if your task is making sure that bank accounts can do withdrawals, you need to update not just the bank account code to perform the actual withdrawals, but also the user interface to make sure the person using your app can access. I want to make that absolutely clear. I'll show that to you again once I show you the starter code here in just a little bit. So yeah, you're going to write your tests. You're going to write the code that passed that test. Once all of the code is written and you think the task is done, you think the task is 100% complete, all the code is written, think it works, you're happy with how it looks, then you're going to commit and push that branch and then make a pull request. This pull request is to give your team a chance to review your code and to give you feedback on it. Ideally, everything looks good and they don't need to tell you much other than stop. But if it's missing or a bug or something like that, that would be the time for your team members to, mention that. It's important to talk about branching strategy here as well. We do not want to merge things directly into the main branch. It's considered a no-no in many contexts. So I've actually already created a branch called development. I'll show you just a second here. So all of the branches that you create should merge into the development branch. Then before we get to the peer review, so like right before we get to peer review, 3 weeks from today, we'll merge our development branch main actually take all of the tasks that we completed and deploy them as our current output. So this is kind of the flow that I want you to get used to. And again, everybody in your group is going to go through this process twice. It's for each of the tasks that they are assigned to work on as part of the project. So with all of that, let me go ahead and switch over to the actual code and give you a quick run through of the code because I think that's worth explaining. And then it'll be your turn to start working on this stuff. So I need to clone this repo again on my machine. I think I did it once this morning, but I'm just going to get a fresh copy just so that I am working with a fresh copy here. So go ahead and clone it and put it, I don't care where I put it. I actually hate putting stuff on the desktop, but I just did, so oh well. My bad, I guess. And so, again, when you clone it, the very first time, I see the door in the readme. That's okay. That is normal. That is all that is on the main. That is all that is on the main branch right now. If you want to see the actual progress of the application, you need to switch over to the development branch, which again, I already created that development branch for you. So in VS Code, you're just going to switch over to the Git tab and then select Checkout To and pick Development. And once you pick the development branch, we can see that, okay, there's my source folder. Inside of the main code, I see 2 classes, one for the bank account and one for the main menu. And then under tests, I see one testing file for it. So I'm just going to run through each of these real quick, kind of explain some design decisions because you're going to have to modify these and update these as you add your own code to this project. Just wanted to give you a push in the right direction. So the bank account, of course, does all of the actual functionality. Here's the deposit method. The one that I already implemented for you is deposits. So I took care of deposit function. Here's the code that with the bank account constructor, deposit method itself, a little getter. that helps for testing purposes. And then you can see that for the actual unit test that I wrote, I have one that does a valid deposit, so it deposits 50 bucks. And then I have another one that does an invalid deposit. So you can see that I actually like this test a lot. It shows how to test, how to write unit test exceptions. We actually tried to do this on work science last week, which I thought was pretty good, even though I hadn't. Here's how to actually do it if you're interested in, man, we need a test that looks like this, especially if you're doing a test with false, for example. I would expect a similar situation where if I try to deposit a negative amount of money, it doesn't make sense, right? Depositing negative dollars is actually a withdrawal, right? We're actually withdrawing money. So we don't want to allow this to happen. This is an invalid argument or an illegal argument. So you can see the way this test is written, it expects that this argument is going to get thrown so that it will jump down here to the catch and skip this fail statement. If the exception doesn't get thrown, then the test will fail because it didn't correctly detect that invalid value. And in terms of the code that I wrote to actually make that happen, it's going to be this part right here, right? The amount is greater than 0. Well, okay, simple has to deposit. But if it's less than 0, well, that's proper. That's an illegal argument. So I'm going to say that by throwing that new exception there. Cool. One thing that you may also notice is that there are no unit tests for the menu, for the main menu. So the main menu is doing a fair amount of stuff. You can see that it's displaying the possible options. There's a method here to get the user's selection. So it's saying, all right, do you want to make a deposit or exit the app? And this method will keep prompting the user till they type in a 1 or a 2. This is a method for processing that user input. And then finally one for performing the actual deposit and running the entire menu itself. Notice that the only method in here that's static is the main method. So I think that's another important thing. Sometimes students will trick. They make all of their methods static. Please don't do that. We want to use good object-oriented programming in this class. So really the only method that should be static is the main method. Everything else should be a non-static instance method for a particular object. And so consider if you're the one who's in charge of doing withdrawals, not only do you need to add a method in here in the bank account class to perform withdrawals, right? And all of the unit tests to make sure that withdrawing works properly, but also as part of that withdrawal task, you need to update the menu, make sure there's an option, right, available for our users to select to perform that withdrawal, and make sure that all of the other code is present in the menu to actually perform that withdrawal should the user choose to do it. Testing over here, trick, I think much of the code in the main menu, again, could be tested if this were a human-computer interaction class, actually. We'd probably be very interested in testing this. Not too about unit tests in the menu. Much more concerned about banking class. And as time goes on, you're going to have to add more classes. As you add more classes, you're going to have to add more tests. So for example, I don't think you're going to need to do it on the first iteration, but eventually, I would imagine you're probably going to need a class that represents not just a single bank account, but an entire app has lots of things, right? That's what banks do. They manage all the different accounts. And at that point in time, you're probably also going to need to write unit tests for that bank to make sure that it works properly. So just keep that in mind. If you have any questions about what you should be testing, whether you can test stuff or not, I know it's not always easy to figure out. Talk to me about it. That's what I'm here for. I can help you. But one of the things that'll definitely help make your life easier is if you try to do what I did here and use lots of little methods to keep things sectioned off. Again, if you cram everything into a big giant method that does 80 million things, it's going to be hard to test that method. So keep your methods short and sweet.
and test as many of them as you can. All right, one final thing that I need to tell you about before I let you connect with your groups and start working on this stuff. As part of the functionality, one other final little thing that you need to do is to write a script.
So this is a command line app, right? There are other UI-oriented classes that you can take. Than that, it's a command line app. Everything's going to be in the console. All the input's going to be via the keyboard. Um, so what that means is that I want to be able to run this app from the command line. So this needs to do two things. It needs to call Java C, file your app, and it needs to call Java to run the app. It's really all that needs to go in this. But the idea behind it is when it comes time to peer review, I should be able to clone your repository, run the script, run this script, right? And then your application should work. So that I can test them and do whatever I need to do to check for the peer review process. So I threw a lot at you. I know I threw a lot at you. Um, but I think that's all that I have to say for this particular moment. Does anybody have any questions for me before we break off into groups and get started on this? Questions? Yes. Yes. It's in the README file. So after you create your repository, this is just going to be in the README. It's all right here in the README for the repository. Oh, I will definitely. So, yeah, thank you for asking. So, I will definitely leave this up on the screen for the rest of class today so that you can do this part hopefully before you go. But I'm also recording, so I will post this video later today. And if you need to refer back to this part, later, what did you say? What was the step by step? It's all recorded. So, yeah, you can definitely refer back to it later. Thanks for asking. Yeah. Any other questions I can address before I anybody use? Yes. I gave you the start of one. Yes, I gave you this main menu class, which I suppose I haven't even actually run this for you yet, but this should work. The unit test should pass, right? I gave you unit tests that pass, at least they did when I tried, and this code should work. So if it says, make a deposit, then boom. Uh, do I actually know that that deposit worked or not? I don't have a way to check my balance. Well, that's a different task, right? That's a different task. So once that task gets completed, there'll probably be a third option on this that says check your balance. And I can use that to check my balance. But otherwise, it doesn't do a whole lot. This is the UI right now, but as you add more and more tasks to it, that menu is going to get a lot bigger and do a lot more stuff. I would encourage you, since we're on that topic, right? Your menu is going to outgrow this file eventually. So the main menu for the first iteration, you might get away with putting everything in that main menu class. But as we go on, you're probably going to have to make sub-menus, right? And each of those should probably go in its own class. So one of the tasks is transferring, for example. So you might need to have a whole transfer menu that's in its own separate class, and you can use inheritance to help reduce the amount of redundancy and code duplication. Some of the tasks deal with bank administrators versus bank customers. So maybe there should be a bank administrator menu with all the administrative stuff, and then there should be a user menu for all the user stuff, right? That's all stuff that I think is worth discussing with your group. One thing I do want to point out, though, uh, there's no mention of logins, passwords here, right? That is not something you need to do. If that's something you want to do on the next, I think that could be a good side to add later. But it's not something I'm asking you to do right now. I'm also not asking you to do files right now. I'm not asking you to use any files. You can, right? A lot of people choose to, but it's not required, at least not based on the tasks that I've given you up until this point. this app will not be complete in 2 weeks, in 3 weeks from now, right? That's not the point. The point is to make progress. This app will be complete 6 weeks from now at the end of the semester. That's not the point. The point is to make continual incremental progress. Okay. If you don't have a group, now is the time for you to come up to the front of the class so that I can assign you to one. If and when you do have a group, please make sure that one of you fills out this form so that I know who is working with who. But if you're looking for a group, just fill it out so I can one for this. Perfect.